And with that, joining me now, Congresswoman from New York's 21st District, Elise Stefanik. Elise, great to have you on with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you, Don. I enjoyed your opening, and boy, you hit on so many important issues, whether it was the Supreme Court unanimous decision today or whether it's the weaponization of the government that Joe Biden is using because Joe Biden's pollings continue to plummet every single day.
Yeah, well, let's break down all of those, obviously. I think we got to talk about, a bunch of them. I mean, were you surprised by the ruling from the Supreme Court today? The New York Times informed me that the 14th Amendment argument was airtight. I mean, it was clear. Now, you heard me sort of sarcastically talk about the first unarmed insurrection in the history of the world, and yet it clearly is. Peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. I don't understand, but I don't have to these days because it doesn't matter. There's seemingly enough powerful forces to sort of create the truth rather than actually talk about what actually happened.
No, I was not surprised, Don. And I said a few weeks ago when CNN had a meltdown, I had the opportunity to go on CNN. I do not like going on CNN, but I thought it was important to talk about that this is weaponization and it's illegal. And I predicted this would be a 9-0 Supreme Court decision. And it was, because what the Democrats and the radical left are trying to do is they are attacking democracy. They want to take away the American people's right to make this decision at the ballot box. And whether it's the Colorado cases or other states in the country that are pursuing this illegitimate, illegal act and unconstitutional act, it was important. And I think President Trump's response was spot on after the Supreme Court decision that this is going to be an important case, an important precedent for the future of this country, not just important today, but protecting the American people, the Constitution, and who we are as Americans in our constitutional republic. So I was not surprised, but I'll tell you who was surprised: the chattering class and the mainstream media, who all say the same thing and parrot the talking points, whether they're from Nancy Pelosi or Mark Elias. So it was a good day for the Constitution and a good day for the American people, a bad day for mainstream media.
Okay, so you heard my opening intro, and I hate to do it because you'd love to just to have a win and be like, hey, it's a win, that's nice. I have to look at everything so cynically these days, only because I've been there enough to just not assume that anything is actually there. Do you think some of the 9-0 win is so that when you get to some of these other cases, they can get more politicized and be like, no, see, we were objective over there. But here it's I just see that happening where it's like, kind of protecting the sanctity of the court to be like, we're actually being objective. Now, this one's a big one, I guess, but like, I don't think anyone, who is, any real sense of it thought it was going anywhere. So do you think this is the way that they sort of try to, rake you over the coals later on something else?
No, and I understand why you can be cynical, especially what your family member, what your father has gone through, whether it was the Russia hoax, the years of that, the fact that Democrats tried to resist the will of the American people in the 2016 election, whether it was the rigged 2020 election. So I understand the trepidation and just the uncertainty and the potential cynicism, but I have faith in our Constitution, and it's going to be very important for the Supreme Court to stand up for the Constitution and frankly, to ensure that we have election integrity, which we did not have in 2020. And that was why on January 6th, I stood up for the Constitution. And those of us that have spoken out have been smeared by the media. We've been smeared by the cocktail class in DC, but we're going to continue to stand up. And I think what is most important is every single day, Joe Biden's poll numbers go down. President poll numbers continue to go up. We see he is in the strongest position when it comes to polling headed into the general election in every national poll this week. And you're seeing in his campaign and House Republicans in my job as conference chair, we're going to make sure that we are on message talking about the issues that matter to the American people, which of course is the border crisis, but also pushing back on this weaponization of the federal government against Democrats' political opponents.
So yeah, I mean, talk about that a little bit in the sense that like, You've actually gotten, very vocal these days, but far more, the last, year, you've gotten more assertive, more aggressive on some of these issues, and is it when they attack you personally, when they do the things that you did, when they tried smearing you for what I thought was one of the great sort of needed to happen conversations before Congress with the universities, when you're asking, hey, is calling for the death of a people and cheering on people who raped and murdered people, do you think that's a violation of Penn or Harvard or MIT's code of conduct? And all of a sudden, the left, who didn't seem to care about free speech at any other point in time, is like, no, 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 it's free speech. I'm like, no, no, no. There's a difference between a code of conduct. You can't just do that. I can't, work at a company and go in and start screaming stuff at the top of my head and not expect to get fired. There's a difference. It was the first time I've seen the left actually defend free speech in the history of, time, I guess, or at least time, post-Trump. You've gotten much more vocal about these things and have become a great sort of actually, attack person on it. Tell me how, you got there and how that, the attacks on you personally perhaps affected that.
Well, certainly this is something that your father, President Trump, feels more than anyone else in terms of the viciousness of the left and the attacks from the mainstream media. This goes back to impeachment hoax part one, impeachment sham part one, when I stood up for the Constitution and the American people and for what was right and called out Adam Schiff. I was smeared by the left. The entire Democrat ecosystem attacked me. They poured in millions and millions to try to defeat me in that election. And it really was an eye opener about how this entire swamp deep state apparatus will target those that are standing up for what's right, standing up for the Constitution. So fast forward to today, because that was in 2018, this hearing with the university presidents. I graduated from Harvard. I know you graduated from Wharton, and I was very, very concerned about the lack of leadership of the former president now of Harvard University. And I encouraged the education chair to have this hearing to address the unacceptable rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. And I'll tell you what, Don, my question was actually the last question of the hearing. There was no media in that portion of the hearing. And it was 3 minutes that the most junior freshman member yielded to me. I sit on top of the dais since I'm a more senior member and have been here for a decade. And I asked a simple question to each of the presidents, starting with MIT, then Penn, then Harvard. And that question was this: does calling for the genocide of Jews violate your university's code of conduct? And they epitomized the groupthink of the radical left, and they all answered, it depends on the context. You put up 3 hardworking constituents from my district, a farmer, a manufacturer, and a suburban mom. They know how to answer that question. It is a disgrace that the university presidents of what are supposed to be the most prestigious higher ed institutions failed. It is now the most viewed testimony in the history of the United States Congress, with over 1 billion views in a week, and it's now well into billions. More views than the famous Watergate hearings, certainly more views than the Pelosi January 6th phony committee that Liz Cheney, my predecessor, who I defeated, served on. And it's because it was long overdue, this reckoning and this earthquake that hearing set off. So we're in the midst of an investigation following up on that hearing, but I was proud to stand up for what's right and to really shine a light on what is wrong in higher ed and what is wrong in this radical left movement that we're seeing on college campuses and in society writ large.
Yeah, when I graduated from Penn, 20-something years ago, I'm pretty sure that if I'd have called for that on campus at the time, I'd have been removed. And that's before anything ever happened like that. People didn't wear politics on their sleeves. It wasn't a big thing on campus, even though it was obviously academic, therefore left-leaning. That was pretty clear. I sure as hell know that if I was a student there at Penn and I did something similar, I'd have been thrown out of my ass. If I went after the trans community at Penn, it wouldn't just be speech. It wouldn't just be depends on the context. I'd be out on my ass. But they could actually sympathize with Hamas at the place where I graduated. I mean, it's truly mind-blowing. It's literally, you realize they've fallen far, but I don't think people fully understand just how far they've actually fallen. You've actually taken steps going, the next steps into this investigation on the anti-Semitism on college campuses. What are the next steps? Because, the hearing was probably enough. The views you talk about, everyone sees how broken, how corrupted, these, formerly great institutions. Like when people are like, where'd you go to school? It used to be proud to say I went to Penn. It meant something. Like now it's like, if you can check a couple boxes, you'll probably get in. Whether you can read or not is probably irrelevant, and they'll get you through one way or the other. What are the next steps in that investigation to make sure this doesn't happen? Because again, it's not just those 3 schools. That's just a small sample set of probably what's happening on, I would imagine, everywhere but like Liberty and Hillsdale, in all fairness.
And we saw last week, Don, we had students from schools, not just MIT, Harvard, and Penn, which were the three university presidents at that hearing. We had students from a number of additional schools, whether it was Tulane, Stanford, Berkeley, and they all talked about just the failures of their leadership and this rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. So hearing that student perspective is important. But what are the important steps? Number one, I think we need to deliver transparency and accountability on those three universities because of that failed testimony. So what we saw from Harvard is we requested documents. They failed to produce them. For the first time ever, Congress issued a subpoena against a college or university because of their failure to turn over the documents. And there is a sense of entitlement. There is a sense of they get to live by a different set of rules. And the reality is US taxpayer dollars give nearly $1 billion to Harvard, Penn, and MIT, each individually every single year, let alone the tax provisions regarding their nonprofit status. And these are schools with tens of billions of dollars of endowment. So there's a lot to this, and it's not just the investigation of what's going on in relation to that hearing, but it's going after the offices of DEI as well, which we've seen at each of these schools. The DEI offices, it is a rot, a moral rot, and it is inherently anti-Semitic. In the case of Harvard, which again, I know the details in depth because many of my fellow alumni have shared that information with me. Hundreds of Jewish students reached out to the Office of DEI. This is before the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack against Israel. And there was not even a single response from the Office of DEI. So now you're seeing class action against Harvard. And that's going to be the case, I believe, for these other schools as well. When you have students who are unsafe on college campuses, who have been physically assaulted, verbally harassed incessantly, and yet the administration doesn't know that each of these university administrations fails to protect these students. So there is a lot here in the investigation. And then legislatively, making sure that the US taxpayer dollars, we should not be propping up these institutions. The US taxpayers don't support that. The other piece that's important is the foreign dollars. There needs to be greater transparency regarding foreign money going into, for example, Middle Eastern studies programs with conditions regarding teaching anti-Israel curricula or the type of professors that are hired. So there is a lot to this. It is a long-term investigation that is more important than the hearing itself.
So, I don't want to pick on you a little bit too much because it's your alma mater. I get it. But didn't Harvard, I read some article, like some guy who was an African-American professor at Harvard was like tasked to like find out like just how bad the racism and all, and he found out it actually wasn't. I don't remember what the case was, but maybe it was about police brutality or something like that. And they fired him. Like he did the research. It was academic. They just didn't like the results. So they literally, maybe his name was like Roland Fryer or something like that. I was reading it the other day and I was like, I forgot all about it. But like, so you have an African-American who's a professor at Harvard who does this research study that I seemingly like asked him to do, and like, don't trust the science because we didn't like the results. So they fire the guy. I mean, isn't that like, it's South Park level insanity from, an institution that we held in high regard for so long, probably much higher than we should have, including you and I.
And that's why it's so disingenuous when they stood at that hearing and each of them said, oh, we stand up for freedom of speech. They cancel conservatives every single day. In the case of Penn and Harvard, they are second to the last and last. Penn is second to the last when it comes to protections of freedom of speech. Harvard is dead last. I myself was canceled by Harvard after January 6th because they didn't like my floor speech when I stood up for the Constitution and the American people in my district. I was removed from a previously, quote unquote, bipartisan board at the Harvard Institute of Politics, which is now, they don't allow any Trump supporters to serve on that board. You only have to, have the status quo groupthink of the left and the never Trumpers to serve on that board. So I wear it as a badge of honor. But the fact that these schools stood up and said, we protect freedom of speech, we know that conservatives are canceled every single day on those college campuses. And the example you just raised, Don, was, yes, it was an economic study. And because they didn't like the outcome, the results showed by the data, they removed this professor. It was an African-American professor who studied law enforcement and found that it did not have racist tendencies the way the left would like to push that on you. So it didn't follow the left's narrative, and he was removed from his professorship. Meanwhile, you have Claudine Gay, the former president who had the abysmal testimony, who plagiarized over 20 times. She still gets her $900,000 salary from Harvard. So
I read she was an academic. I guess she did like some sort of like, one of the studies, whether it's gender studies or African-American studies, but like sort of one of these created, they weren't they weren't things you could get a degree in when we graduated from college, right? It was like that's like a new woke thing. And it's like, well, any other professor would be fired. Any student that actually did these things would lose their
That's right.
degree. They'd be thrown out of school in an instant. There's like numerous examples of students that plagiarized far less. I guess for her, it was like in over half of the actual
Over half
papers
her
she ever did. And she didn't do
publications,
that many papers relative to
right.
like, I guess, what was it, Larry Summers or whoever was the president before her. I mean, he did in one summer what she did in her entire, academic career. But none of that matters anymore because she checked a couple boxes for them and therefore was beyond reproach. And that seems really scary because, these are the people that are teaching our kids. These are the people that are creating the next generation. You're the exception, but of course, they threw you off the bipartisan board. They just want robots that regurgitate the narrative. And I guess that's enough to get you through Harvard.
And you know what? That was epitomized at the hearing when they literally verbatim answered the question the same exact way. It depends on the context. They were all prepped by the same attorney, but to me, that, as I said, epitomizes what is happening, the moral rot and the intellectual rot, frankly, at these higher ed institutions. And you're exactly right about what is happening at Harvard. When she was chosen as the university president, it was the shortest selection process. Typically, it is very robust. They look at all the academic publications. You're typically a leader in your academic field. And when you compare it to her predecessors, whether it was Drew Faust, whether it was Larry Summers, who is a very preeminent economist, who's a registered Democrat, who was a strong leader. He was university president when I was there. The faculty ran him out because he wouldn't toe the line. And compared to what Claudine Gay said, though, what Larry Summers said, which he talked about how young girls are more likely to play with dolls, whereas boys are more likely to play with trucks and trains. But the context of his speech was he was talking about encouraging women to pursue STEM. Harvard faculty ran him out literally for that. So it shows how far these universities have shifted, yet they're protecting Claudine Gay, who wouldn't condemn calling for the genocide of Jews. So it tells you so much about what's wrong with society today. And to translate that to this November election, that's why I believe that Republicans and specifically President Trump are polling in such a strong position because people know they can see through this garbage of the radical left.
So this Thursday, Joe Biden's going to address the nation in the State of the Union. You've heard him do a couple. You heard all of my fathers. What do you think he's going to say on Thursday? It feels like every speech he's given has always been divisive. I guess he'll try to bring that back if he can, and the media will try to say it was a great speech for unity. Whatever they can to help him. Let's call it barely stumble through either the speech or this election process. What do you think is going to happen there, and what do you think is going to be the sort of natural response?
Well, we're already seeing from the White House that they are attempting to use this as an opportunity to reset. There is no resetting. The State of the Union is in crisis because of Joe Biden. People feel the crisis day to day, Don. When I talk to constituents in my district, people are struggling with Biden inflation. They're seeing their grocery bills catastrophically high. And when you're on a median family income of about $50,000, which is my district, those increased prices, they are painful. Add that to increased utility bills, increased home heating bills. People are struggling. Also, the number one issue right now is the border crisis. Joe Biden is going to try to pass the buck and blame Congress when everybody knows in this country, except the chattering class in the mainstream media, that the border crisis is a direct result of Joe Biden's executive action that he took in the first days when he was sworn into office. We had the most secure border in modern history, in our nation's history, under President Trump's effective policies, and yet Joe Biden shredded those policies. That's why we have a border crisis raging, not just along the southern border, but every state's a border state in our country. And we've seen an increase on the border in the northern border as well, including individuals on the terrorist watch list. So even though I'm in way upstate New York, it impacts us, it impacts our community. And in New York City, these great cities are falling apart because of the illegal immigration crisis, because of Joe Biden. People like Lake and Riley, innocent Americans, are losing their lives. And yet Joe Biden has the audacity to try to blame Congress when House Republicans passed a Strong Secure the Border Act. It's offensive to the American people. So the White House is desperately going to try to reset. There is no resetting this failed administration. It is a crisis, and it's a crisis Joe Biden's making.
Yeah, you can't believe your lying eyes, right? I always say, like, listen, I get it. When I see it, and I say this all the time, and I think people get it, like, if I go to the store and I'm pissed off, or if I take my kids to McDonald's and I'm like, man, I'm not saying it's changing my habits. I'm not pretending I'm something I'm not. I get it. I'm the son of a billionaire from New York City. But if I have sticker shock, if I see how bad it is, I don't think they can lie their way out of that. They see, criminals being treated with far more regard than American citizens. I feel like people feel they're second-class citizens in their own country, and that's because, hey, New York, well, let's give them $10,000 in cash. They're illegals. They're doing this. They're not contributing anything. They're in hotel rooms for free. We're displacing people. We're taking kids' school gyms away. We're putting them in there. And this is each and every state. We're going to fly them all over. They don't have to have ID. That's fine. That's like, you and I, you are a member of Congress sitting. If you didn't have your ID, you're thrown out on your butt. You're not getting on a plane. And yet, it doesn't matter. Who needs it? It's so obvious what they're doing. And yet, yeah, it's Trump's fault. It's true. The mental gymnastics it takes to get there is truly impressive. But I guess it's not going to stop them.
And that's why it's so offensive when they tried to make Bidenomics. Remember when the White House was focusing on Bidenomics as part of their messaging strategy? That was inherently going to be a failure because Bidenomics itself has been a failure. Yeah. So you're right. You can't convince people of their lying eyes because people understand. And as the White House tries to push and force people to support his agenda, I think they're going to drive people further and further away because people are seeing the impact, whether it's the crime crisis in their community, whether like in New York City, they're seeing $15,000 taxpayer debit cards provided to illegals, yet Americans are struggling to make ends meet. Another case that really highlights this America Last legacy of Joe Biden is you have school children, United States school children in New York who were forced to go home, and the school was used to house illegal immigrants. So the kids are learning online, which is devastating. We know that. And it's all because of Joe Biden's border crisis. So again, people are smart, and that's why you see this in the polling every single day. And on the issue of the border, President Trump leads Joe Biden by over 35 points. On the issue of economy, he is over 22 points. On the issue of national security, he's double digits ahead. On the issue of being able to do the job, he's double digits ahead. So on every metric, President Trump continues to pull in a stronger position than ever before going into the general election.
So, they'll obviously play their games. The Democrats do that well. They got sort of the free contribution from big tech, from the mainstream media. But I think if Joe Biden wins at this point, I don't think anyone in America will actually believe it. And rightfully so. I mean, you'd have to be a moron. But what sort of campaign is Joe Biden going to run? The polling makes it clear that the country's ready to move on from this awfulness, and it's not Joe Biden's policies. I think we got to be very clear. Joe Biden is enacting what Democrats want. They campaigned on doing these things. It's just failed miserably. But it's also different than 2020. They can't, maybe they can, I guess. They can do anything. They can get away with a lot. But they can't just stick him in a basement and pretend, oh, no, we only had 3 people show up to his stump speech because, COVID restrictions. You got to stand in the white circle. It's a little different. If they hide him in the basement now, I think it'll be a lot more obvious, and there's no rational excuse other than he's incompetent.
Well, they're in a very difficult position because the key is, and this is for any campaign, whether it's for president or whether it's for members of Congress, you need to have a candidate where the more the American people or the voters see him, that the numbers go up. You never want to see those numbers go down as they learn more about the candidate. In the case of Joe Biden, the more they put him out there, his numbers continue to slide because he's not able to get through the day. Look at the contrast with the border visits. Joe Biden, his first time ever to the southern border, compare that to the strength that President Trump showed during the border visit. Joe Biden literally did not know where he was walking. It's never spoken to the head of the Border Patrol. So when they're trying to put him out there, it is failing and it causes his numbers to slide. And I think it's going to be difficult for him to get through this State of the Union, which is an important speech. And President Trump always did an exceptional job knocking it out of the park. But I think physically getting through it, Joe Biden is going to struggle, just like he does getting through every single day or when they put him out on the campaign trail. So I think that we're going to continue to see those poll number slides. And what I'm very focused on as House Republican Conference Chair is making sure that we're not taking the bait from the mainstream media to only talk about issues through the Democratic lens. We are going to go on offense and talk about issues that actually matter to the American people, that are unifying, securing the border, standing up for parents' rights in schools, lowering taxes, lowering these onerous regulations that Joe Biden's put into place, unleashing energy independence, basically the policies that your father put in place that led to economic boom and strong national security around the world. And that's why we have been much more unified, working with President Trump and campaigning as one team as we head to the ballot this November.
So, talk about that a little bit. I mean, obviously you're a congresswoman from, sort of upstate New York, and, that's a little different, right? It's not, That's not Alabama. There's people. It's a lot closer. When you talk about districts in terms of, and yet it feels like you're able to go pretty hard on these issues. That is harder. Like people. The people who watch it, and they're like, why can't It's like, well, you're in a maybe not you, but there's guys that they're in a Democrat plus 40 district. They magically win, and they're like, they can't go all the way in, or they're going to be out in 2 years. But it feels like you've been able to go quite hard on some of these issues. Are people even in places like New York that are going to be a lot more sort of left leaning, a lot different on these issues? It seems like even they're seeing it because, again, everyone was a sanctuary city until you actually had to deal with the problems that places like Texas has had to deal with for years or whatever. Now that they actually have to deal with it, all of a sudden it's, hey, someone else could be a sanctuary city. We really believe in it, just not here, somewhere else. Let's get it out of here.
So New York is an interesting case study because if you look at when Republicans have picked up seats, there are no other states other than New York and California where we've picked up more seats. And what I think is interesting about that is those are traditionally viewed as blue states. And people see and feel the result of Democrat policies, both at the federal level from Joe Biden, but also at the state and city as well. So you've seen a sea change in New York State in terms of how we've picked up those 4 seats that helped us deliver the House majority. Long Island, which used to be bluer, is now a sea of red in the sense that people are concerned about the crime crisis. They're concerned about the border crisis. And whether it's at the local elections or whether it's those seats that we were able to pick up in the last congressional elections, we flipped those from Democrat to Republican. And I've had an interesting seat given my district. So my district was the swingiest district in the country, Don, from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. And it tells the story of today's Republican Party. My district voted for Barack Obama by 12 points. No, sorry, by more than that, by 15 points. And then it voted for Donald Trump by 12 points. That was the swing in my district. And of course, we flipped it. I flipped it in 2014 from Democrat to Republican. Increasingly, President Trump and today's Republican Party does stronger and stronger in my district. We have flipped every single county legislative seat. We have flipped all the DA seats. We have flipped all the county sheriff seats. Every seat that has been targeted, we have flipped to Republican in my district. We flipped mayor's races where cities that Joe Biden won. We just elected 4 mayors in those key cities because of the crime crisis. And what does that show me? It shows me that your father has grown the Republican Party. President Trump has grown the Republican Party into working class people, hardworking Americans who are the backbone of this economy and have been fundamentally left behind by DC for far too long. So I really have been able to see that firsthand in a way that I think, you're where you come from. And I come from upstate New York. So I've lived this modernization of the Republican Party. And the media often doesn't want to talk about that. They just don't want to understand that President Trump has grown this party, let alone the positive growth we've seen with African-American voters and Hispanic voters as well. So I'm a big believer that Trump on the ballot helps Republicans. I am the voice in Congress that always says it is a net gain to have President Trump on the ballot because he will turn out voters, he will turn out independents, he will turn out people that maybe traditional Republicans have struggled with in years and decades past.
Yeah, I mean, common sense, right? The left does this thing. If you're the left, you're part of the resistance. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, if the resistance is agreeing with corporate America, Hollywood, all of these bastions of power, Wall Street, I'm like, you're probably not actually the resistance, and that's the reality. I mean, hardworking people in upstate New York have been left by the wayside by Democrat policies who've forgotten about them to enrich their, Wall Street, crony capitalists. Like, it's pretty amazing. And so they're trying to do that. I think they tried to do that with Joe Biden. That's how he sort of got it's blue collar Joe. I'm like, there's nothing blue collar about a guy that left Scranton, Pennsylvania at like 9, moved to the Beltway basically, and has been a lifelong politician who's frankly never functioned outside of the world of bureaucracy. Like, that's not blue collar. You can say that all you want. Like, I'm more blue collar than Joe. I have worked more blue collar jobs than Joe Biden in my life. And, the left will try to criticize that and make fun of it, but that's the reality. He's not done a single one. But, because he was born in Scranton and he lived there. I think I lived in Pennsylvania, frankly, longer than Joe Biden did in my lifetime because I went to boarding school for 5 years before college. So, like, my 9 years is about the same as his. And I think I actually probably learned something about blue-collar America during my time, living in Pennsylvania and living at the time in Pottstown, one of these sort of, American towns that time forgot, industrial town that was collapsing by the time I got there because of the policies, frankly, of all of Washington, D.C., but a lot of the left that shipped that and those jobs abroad. to save a couple cents on a widget by sending your American dream to China.
Right. And I think when you brought up New York as well, when you see just the weaponization from Tish James or the judge in New York State, hardworking New Yorkers, when we see a crime crisis and failed bail reform, when on one hand you have Alvin Bragg and Tish James who are letting violent criminals and illegals run the streets in New York, commit assaults and violent crimes, targeting law enforcement, assaulting law enforcement, and yet they're spending taxpayer dollars to go after Joe Biden's leading political opponent, Donald Trump. New Yorkers are smart. They can see through that. And that's why I've challenged and I've called out Tish James and the judge for their unethical handling of this case. But again, people are smart. They understand this is the weaponization of radical prosecutors and of the government because Joe Biden's numbers, he can't win on his policies because his policies have been a crisis and they've just failed the American people. When you talk about relating to constituents. I think about my family. My parents started a small business when I was a kid. I grew up around our family small business. It's a plywood wholesale distribution company. Neither of my parents had the opportunity to graduate from college. They really invested in giving my brother and I greater opportunity. And I was proud to be the first member of my immediate family to graduate from college. And at the time, I was proud to graduate from Harvard, but mostly I'm proud and have stayed a conservative going in and coming out of Harvard and not allowing them to brainwash.
And that's a lot harder. It's like,
that is a lot harder.
It's like sending your kids to school in Hollywood and having them not be trans. Like, it's not easy. It's going to happen. You gotta fight. So you're a rare exception, Elise. Congratulations.
But think about that compared to what we see with the Biden crime family. You have Hunter Biden, you have Joe Biden's brother, all having a Biden crime family where Joe Biden is the big guy, 10% for the big guy, which Hunter Biden just testified. It is corrupt to the core. So when you talk about what voters are paying attention to across America, they understand that there is Biden corruption to the core, that there's a different set of rules if your last name is Biden or your last name is Clinton, and yet they go after hardworking Americans. And that's why people are standing up in support of President Trump, because they know if the weaponized government can go after President Trump, they can go after anyone, and they have and they will.
I think you're 100% right. I talk about this a lot on the show, but do you actually expect there to be a Biden impeachment vote? Obviously, with Congress, a 1-seat majority, 2-seat majority right now, at the same time, knowing what I went through, during the Russia hoax, I'm like, there's never been this amount, this is fire, and they're trying to masquerade it as smoke, as opposed to the other way around, where maybe this is so flagrant, it's so obvious. If it was me and DJT with the same fact set as Joe Biden, this thing would have been over. We'd have been impeached, and I'd have been in Gitmo, 3 years ago. Is anything going to happen with it? Because it's so flagrant. The media will do their thing. Big tech will do their thing. They'll pretend it's a non-issue. The Democrats will do I don't think anyone actually believes it's not a thing. Whether they're convenient with the results if you're on the left, but this is truly an affront on everything that there is about America. We're making $trillion decisions, and maybe they're being based on the fact that the Bidens are themselves compromised. We're blowing everything in China, just every dealing with them. It's like America last, America last. We're about to, never-ending funding for Ukraine and this insanity that they can't articulate a response. Are these decisions that we're bankrolling our future on, that we're going to stuff, trillions more in debt on our children and their grandchildren that they may never be able to overcome? Are they being based on compromise, and we're not doing anything about it? It just feels like we're also playing the game differently than the Democrats did.
Well, certainly that is the case, because the Democrats think about it was a hoax. Their entire Russia scam was a hoax. Impeachment was a hoax. They shredded the Constitution. And again, it was politically weaponized against Democrats' top opponent, which is Donald Trump. In the case of Joe Biden, I believe we have what is the largest corruption scandal, not just in modern times, but in American politics, that you have the president of the United States who is compromised, whose family has financially benefited illegally, I believe, from foreign adversaries, and directly taking communist Chinese money, which went into the Biden's, Jill and Joe Biden's bank account. That was just testified by Hunter Biden under oath. And yet you have the media not asking tough questions and brushing this under the rug. I've been one of the strongest voices in continuing to push this investigation forward. And the reality is, Don, when you're in the House majority and it's so slim, it's the speaker who's going to make the decision when we bring a vote to the floor and corral those votes. But I have been a very strong voice moving towards impeachment. And I think these are clearly impeachable offenses. When you have a president of the United States who has lied incessantly to the American people. Remember when he said he had no involvement whatsoever
Yeah,
in Hunter
none.
Biden's
I remember
business
them
dealings?
screaming about emoluments when
And
us.
yet
Like,
now
someone
the
bought a
White House
cheeseburger. We
look,
used to have to account for someone buying a cheeseburger who may have been a foreign national associated with the government, like Trump, at Trump DC. We literally had teams of accountants to account for someone buying a cheeseburger, and we'd have to give that money back to the Treasury. Like, China doesn't give $1 billion investment to a crackhead like Hunter Biden. Like, and that money doesn't just magically appear in Joe's bank account. And no one believes
it
that
all
this
goes
is real.
back
They're not
actually,
credible business people. We accounted for cheeseburgers,
right.
okay, during the Trump presidency because they were going to impeach us otherwise. And like, you have millions of dollars flowing to all of the Bidens, none of whom are international business people, none of whom can explain why they're getting it, all of whom are basically being said, oh, well, it's buying influence. It's so ridiculous. The
It's so
grandchildren
flagrant.
are on the payroll of China, the great-grandchildren, the ex-girlfriend, the mistress. I'm like, it's clear to me, like, everyone has a Biden laptop. Everyone has probably more compromising information about Joe and or Hunter. And it's just like, it's okay. DC is fine with that result because they control it and they're all, they're all in on it. Like they're all going to get a benefit one day down the road, or they're all on someone else's payroll. It's truly sick.
It is sick and it is flagrant. And again, none of this would have come out if it were not for House Republicans embarking on this impeachment inquiry. And I do think Jamie Comer and Jim Jordan have done a great job moving through this process. And we're going to still follow every fact and make sure that the American people knows this, because the media is not asking these questions. It's House Republicans who are asking these questions to get to the truth. And as I said, I believe this is the greatest corruption scandal. I believe these are impeachable offenses. I've said that for months, so it is nothing new in terms of my position. I've said Joe Biden is compromised, and this is really an issue of national security above all. When you have a president of the United States who is compromised from communist China, who is received as part of this illegal Biden crime family entity where every member of the family has benefited from our adversaries, that is unfit to be president of the United States. And it is a compromise when it comes to national security issues. And when it comes to being tough, which this president has not been on communist China, which I believe is one of the greatest threats that we will face, certainly for our generation. And who your father had an incredible record on standing up to adversaries and showing American strength around the world.
Well, I'm actually going to become an artist because I'm told that sons of presidents can sell art at the level of Picasso in terms of price, $500,000 for some finger painting. So I'm going to become a finger painting artist, Elise. It's going to be wonderful.
And
I'm going to
also
make millions.
It's
totally legit. It's totally legit. Nothing to see here, folks. I'm going to become an artist tomorrow.
Democrat donor with multiple meetings at the White House, and the press says nothing to see here.
It has nothing to do with.
Again, the American people are smart. They see through this.
Yeah.
They understand that if they, put together art like Hunter Biden, it would not sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, well, see, I even have some people responding on here that they would buy my art. So I appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much. I do have a feeling, though, that no one in the live chat would be buying my art for $500,000 a piece, outselling legitimately some of the greatest artists in the history of time, for my first finger painting. So, let's make it clear that there's a difference. But, Elise, what do you think? You're out there every day, heading some big conferences for the Republicans. What do you think's the most, persuasive message for Republicans to get out this election year? We understand we work against, sometimes it feels like insurmountable, you're up against tech, you're up against mainstream media. It's like, people who aren't just focused in on the reality, who aren't, that political, they're going to get bombarded with that message. Social media, big social's going to make sure you don't see anything, and Instagram will censor you. And, what do you think, though, is going to be the most important getting out there, especially for those Americans who, again, don't follow politics or maybe aren't paying that much attention? How do we make sure they understand exactly what's going on and who's actually at fault for that? What's that message to them?
That message is, and I say this at every event that I do locally. We always say this next election is the most important election in our lifetime, but this one really is. People inherently feel that the country is slipping away from them. And you see the majority of Americans overwhelmingly understand the U.S. is on the wrong track because of Joe Biden's failed policies. But also the data point that I look at that I think is very, very concerning is, for the first time ever in American history, people believe that the next generation is going to be worse off than their parents' generation, and that's fundamentally un-American. So if you want America first policies, vote for President Trump. If you want America last policies, that would be Joe Biden, because Joe Biden has put Americans last, whether it's the border crisis, whether it's failed Biden economics, whether it's his just weakness around the world, which has put our national security at risk, whether it's shredding our energy independence, making us more reliant upon foreign energy, whereas under President Trump, we had energy exports and complete energy independence. On all the issues, President Trump wins. And that resonates with people, Don. I will tell you, people inherently feel the country is slipping away. And they also understand that they're not going to let the media dictate this election. I think previously the media just was so biased that people have tuned that out a bit, and the media is just so egregious day to day. So again, people are tuning that out and really focusing on what is impacting their families. And they see the crime crisis, the border crisis, struggling to pay grocery bills, struggling to pay utility bills. So I think we're going to win on the issues. I think President Trump is continuing to knock it out of the park in terms of his campaign and in terms of talking about the issues that matter, and a stark contrast with Joe Biden, where they have no message. Their message is one of dividing the country. Their message is one of American weakness. Their message is one of America last, and that's not going to resonate in this election.
Well, I really appreciate you being out there fighting this way. Thanks so much for joining us, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Let everyone know where they can find you, by the way, so they can see what you're up to and what you're doing. The comments on here in the live chat are great. So let us know where we can find you, because we need more fighters.
Follow me on Elise Stefanik on all the social media, as well as EliseForCongress.com, and just make sure that you talk to all your friends and family to get them out to vote this November.
Well, really appreciate being here, Elise. Thanks so much. And I'm sure as more of this stuff breaks, we'll be talking to you again soon. So thank you, and I'll speak to you in a little bit. And before we go, guys, what I want to do is maybe we'll do it at the end.